The first chapter of this Torah portion I'm going to read to you opens a can of worms that absolutely bothers and perplexes Christianity, even provides much material for the church to demonstrate the folly of the law of Moses in their eyes, if not even becoming the source of jokes. Yet it explains so much about what our Messiah did for us, why it had to unfold as it did. So open your Bibles to this week's Torah portion, which is going to begin at Numbers chapter 19. Numbers chapter 19. And follow along with me, please. Adonai said to Moshe and Aharon, "This is the regulation from the Torah which Adonai has commanded. Tell the people of Israel to bring you a young red female cow without fault or defect, which has never borne a yoke. You are to give it to Eleazar the Cohen. It is to be brought outside the camp and slaughtered in front of him. And Eleazar the Cohen is to take some of its blood with his finger and sprinkle his blood towards the front of the tent of meeting 7 times. The heifer is to be burned to ashes before his eyes. Its skin, its meat, blood, dung is to be burned to ashes. The Cohen, the priest, is to take cedar wood, hyssop, scarlet yarn, throw them onto the heifer as it's burning up. Then the Cohen is to wash his clothes and himself in water, after which he may re-enter the camp. But the Cohen will remain unclean until evening. The person who burned up the heifer is to wash his clothes and himself in water, but he will remain unclean until evening. A man who is clean is to collect the ashes of the heifer and store them outside the camp in a clean place. They are to be kept for the community of the people of Israel to prepare water for purification from sin. The one who collected the ashes of the heifer is to wash his clothes and be unclean until evening. For the people of Israel, for the foreigner staying with them, this will be a permanent regulation. Anyone who touches a corpse, no matter whose dead body it is, will be unclean for 7 days. He must purify himself with these ashes. On the 3rd and 7th day, then he will be clean. But if he does not purify himself the 3rd and 7th days, he will not be clean. Anyone who touches a corpse, no matter whose dead body it is, and does not purify himself, has defiled the tabernacle of Adonai. That person will be cut off from Israel, because the water for purification was not sprinkled on him. He will be unclean, and his uncleanness is still on him. This is the law. When a person dies in a tent, everyone who enters the tent, everything in the tent will be unclean for 7 days. Every open container without a cover closely attached is unclean. Also, whoever is in an open field and touches a corpse, whether of someone killed by a weapon, or of someone who died naturally, or the bone of a person, or a grave, will be unclean for 7 days. For the unclean person, they are to take some of the ashes of the animal burned up as a purification from sin and add them to fresh water in a container. A clean person is to take a bunch of hyssop leaves, dip it in the water, sprinkle it on the tent, on all the containers, on the people who were there, on the person who touched the bone, or the person killed, or the one who died naturally, or the grave. The clean person will sprinkle the unclean person on the 3rd and 7th days. On the 7th day, he will purify him. Then he will wash his clothes and himself in water, and he will be clean at evening. The person who remains unclean and does not purify himself will be cut off from the community because he has defiled the sanctuary of Adonai. The water for purification has not been sprinkled on him. He's unclean. This is to be a permanent regulation for them. The person who sprinkles the water for purification is to wash his clothes. Whoever touches the water for purification will be unclean until evening. Anything the unclean person touches will be unclean, and anyone who touches him will be unclean until evening. Well, the people of Israel, the whole community, entered the Sin desert in the first month, and they stayed at Kadesh. There Miriam died. There she was buried. And because the community had no water, they assembled themselves against Moshe and Aharon, and the people quarreled with Moshe and said, "We wish you had died when our brothers died before Adonai. Why did you bring Adonai's community into the desert? To die there, we and our livestock? Why did you make us leave Egypt? To bring us to this terrible place without seed, figs, grapevines, pomegranates, or even water to drink?" Moshe and Aharon left the assembly, went to the entrance to the tent of meeting, and fell on their faces. And the glory of Adonai appeared to them. And Adonai said to Moshe, "Take the staff, assemble the community, you and Aharon your brother, and before their eyes, tell the rock to produce its water. You will bring them water out of the rock, and thus enable the community and their livestock to drink." And Moshe took the staff from the presence of Adonai, as he had ordered him. But after Moshe and Aharon had assembled the community in front of the rock, he said to them, "Listen here, you rebels. Are we supposed to bring you water from this rock?" And then Moshe raised his hand, and he hit the rock twice with his staff. Water flowed out in abundance, and the community and their livestock drank. But Adonai said to Moshe and Aharon, "Because you did not trust in me, so as to cause me to be regarded as holy by the people of Israel, you will not bring this community into the land I had given them." This is Meribah spring, where the people of Israel disputed with Adonai, and he was caused to be regarded as holy by them. Moshe sent messengers from Kadesh to the king of Edom. "This is what your brother Israel says. You know all the troubles we've gone through, that our ancestors went down into Egypt. We lived in Egypt a long time, and the Egyptians treated us and our ancestors badly. But when we cried out to Adonai, he heard us, and he sent an angel and brought us out of Egypt. Now, here we are in Kadesh, a city at the edge of your territory. Please, let us pass through your land. We will not go through fields or vineyards. We won't drink any water from the wells. We will go along the king's highway, not turning aside either to the right or the left until we've left your territory." But Edom answered, "You are not to pass through my land, and if you do, I will come out against you with the sword." And the people of Israel replied, "We will keep to the highway. If we do drink the water, either we or our livestock will pay for it. Just let us pass through on foot. It's nothing." But he said, "You are not to pass through." And Edom came out against them with many people and much force. Thus Edom refused to allow Israel passage through its territory, so Israel turned away. They traveled on from Kadesh, and the people of Israel, the whole community, arrived at Mount Hor. At Mount Hor, by the border of the land of Edom, Adonai said to Moshe and Aharon, "Aharon is about to be gathered to his people, because he is not to enter the land I have given to the people of Israel, inasmuch as you rebelled against what I said at the Meribah spring. Take Aharon and Eleazar his son and bring them up to Mount Hor. Remove the garments from Aharon, put them on Eleazar his son. Aharon will be gathered to his people, and he will die there." Moshe did as Adonai had ordered. They went up onto Mount Hor before the eyes of the whole community. Moshe removed the garments from Aharon and put them on Eleazar his son, and Aharon died there on the top of the mountain. Then Moshe and Eleazar came down the mountain, and when the entire community saw that Aharon was dead, they mourned Aharon 30 days, the whole house of Israel. Amen. Sometimes things need to be said that are less than comfortable for me to say. And I think my wife can back me up when I tell you I agonize over some of these things. But I'm going to say them anyway because I think they need to be said, and I think we all need to ponder it. Because the church as we know it today was originally created in the 4th century as a faith well separated from Israel, from the Jewish people, and from what Yeshua taught, then it's no surprise that such laws and rituals as we just read about were dismissed. However, it was for different reasons that the modern era church dismisses them than it was several centuries ago. The Constantinian Church of Rome's primary goal was to create a new faith that was exclusively for Gentiles. Therefore, the Torah containing the law of Moses had to go. The early Constantinian Church had no issue with the rituals involving sacrifice and the like. Such concept was practiced. It was accepted throughout the Roman Empire. The modern church, however, sees the matter more in light of these ritual observances of the Torah viewed as primitive superstition, blamed on ancient legends and god systems. And also they see them as antiquated because of the underlying church doctrine that the advent of Jesus and eventually the New Testament abolished these rituals. Now, because of the era the church has been immersed in for 1,600 years, an era that I believe is drawing to a close. The mission and focus of Christianity has generally been to spread the good news of salvation in Jesus, something that has been done quite effectively. However, what seems to have suffered along the way is the expected maturation process of the individual believer, what Paul calls the perfecting of the saints. And those who wish to move forward into a deeper faith and knowledge of the Lord haven't had a lot of encouragement or support. It's been a little like a community with a burgeoning population that has made the strategic decision to focus on building excellent new elementary schools for the children. But as the children matriculated through each grade, they neglected to build a high school. And at some point, there was no choice but to repeat the same educational material over and over again, perhaps in slightly different form and style. Yet they declare this repetition to be deeper enlightenment. The 15-year-old student, having already heard and learned the material, then effectively sits in the same classroom with the 10-year-old, who is just now hearing it for the first time. Therefore, should a New Testament Christian turn to the Old Testament, these laws and rituals are often chuckled at and dismissed. That's a shame. Because the God principles they teach are also dismissed as non-essential. Interestingly, late in the 20th century, the evangelical church gained a renewed interest in prophetic happenings and in the end times. Therefore, most of us have at least heard of the Red Heifer and the Jews' constant search for a perfect one. This special red-colored cow is needed when the Jews' long hoped-for temple is rebuilt in Jerusalem. Here in Numbers 19 is where the purpose and the details of the Red Heifer ritual are laid out for us. Now, I realize that most people I'm speaking to fall into the category of Hebrew roots or Messianic, and so you are open to the Old Testament and to the Torah. Even so, we are modern people. And nearly all of us having come to salvation at one church or another, and therefore so much of what we have just read in this chapter and previous ones about these elaborate rituals cannot help but seem to us like a lot of mumbo jumbo, if not sorcery. This is because Christians have generally set aside ritual as unimportant and unneeded, if not even sinful, in the practice of our faith. We don't see its value any longer. And unless perhaps we are Catholic or one of the Eastern Orthodox churches, we really don't like it. We're not all that comfortable talking about it. But contained within Torah ritual is the visible picture of what is going on in an invisible spiritual realm and how it affects us on earth. Now, long before the Constantinian Church was around, dedicated and intelligent rabbis struggled with the right words to explain just why many of these rituals were called for and what actually occurred during these sacred procedures. Just as we do today. I mean, did the blood and the body parts of sacrificed animals actually take on supernatural qualities? Did sacred procedures done in the right way exactly and in right order create, magical-like benefits upon the people of Israel? Does bathing in water, saying the right words at the right time somehow react with our biological flesh and our invisible souls so as to remove whatever it is that has contaminated us and thus offended God? So as important as this chapter of Numbers is and its details are, so is the need for us to take another step in understanding the biblical principles surrounding ritual impurity. That is, the nature and effect of uncleanness. Now, I'm borrowing this from a deep dive lesson I did many years ago on the same subject. So I'd like to begin by quoting a brief story from the Talmud about a famous rabbi who was asked to explain the very issue as I just framed it and his startling answer. Goes like this. A heathen questioned the Honorable Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai, saying, "The things you Jews do appear to be a kind of sorcery. A cow is brought, it's burned. It is pounded into ash, and the ash is gathered up. Thus, when one of you gets defiled by contact with a corpse, 2 or 3 drops of the ash mixed with water are sprinkled upon him, and he is told, 'You are cleansed.'" Rabban Yochanan answered the heathen, "Has the spirit of madness ever possessed you?" And he replied, "No." And the rabbi said, "Have you ever seen a man whom the spirit of madness possessed?" The heathen replied, "Yes. And the rabbi said, and what do you do for such a man? And the heathens replied, well, roots are brought, the smoke of their burning is made to rise about him, and the water is sprinkled upon him until the spirit of madness flees. And Rabban Yochanan then said, do your ears just not hear what your mouth is saying? It is the same with a man who is defiled by contact with a corpse. He too is possessed by a spirit, the spirit of uncleanness. And Scripture says, I will make false prophets as well as the unclean spirit vanish from the land. Now, this is when it gets good. Now, when the heathen left, Rabban Yochanan's disciples said, our master, you put off that heathen with a mere reed of an answer. But what answer will you give to us? And Rabban Yochanan answered, by your lives, I swear, the corpse does not have the power by itself to defile, nor does the mixture of ash and water have the power by itself to cleanse. The truth is that the purifying power of the red cow is a decree from the Holy One. The Holy One said, I have set it down as a statute. I have issued it as a decree. You are not permitted to transgress my decree. This is the ritual law. Now, I hope you hear the humility and the honesty that is on display. In essence, the rabbi is saying this. I'm not entirely sure how this whole uncleanness and its remedy thing works. But I do know for certain that red cow has no magical power in itself. I also know that a corpse can't inherently defile anybody. In the end, we do this red heifer purification procedure because God said, do it. And if we do so, he will count us as purified, and it is not permitted for Hebrews to do otherwise. Folks, it's an issue of obedience, not of magic. Do you see this? So the good rabbi is denying any kind of sorceries involved. He readily admits that it all sure looks like mumbo-jumbo pagan exorcism. It's not. And part of the reason it's not is that he says God has said that he has banished unclean spirits from the land of Israel. So it's impossible that the contaminated man could even have an unclean spirit on him. Now, whether the rabbi is correct on that, that's debatable. But what we find is a very strange paradox in Numbers 19 about the workings of the red heifer's ashes upon the defiled man who touched the corpse. Let's take a close look at what the red heifer sacrifice is and see just where that paradox lays. Okay? See, the first thing we notice is that the animal involved is a female. It's a young heifer, but older than a yearling, and it has never been used as a work animal. That is, it's never been used for a common purpose. Okay? That's what's meant by it's never been yoked. Now, this animal must also be unblemished, because that's a basic requirement for all animals used for sacrifice, regardless of the category of sacrifice or the type of animal. Next, and most importantly, we are told that the red cow must be taken where? Outside the camp to be slaughtered. This represents the first element of the paradox. The red heifer, which is to be used as the primary ingredient and an especially important ritual purification concoction is going to be killed in an unclean place. Now recall just what outside the camp means. Okay, the only ritually clean ground is inside the camp. Inside the camp is where the Israelites live. And in time, this area became more defined, and actual measurements were assigned. City limits, if you would. Do not confuse ritually clean with ritually holy. Okay? The only ritually holy ground was within the temple or the tabernacle courtyard, which lay at the center of the ritually clean camp. So somewhere outside the camp, in an unclean place, a special altar was erected. Calling it an altar is probably too strong of a word. This was merely a large but common wood fire mound upon which the red cow was killed and it was burned up. Now, the general procedure was that a priest of high order, not the high priest, who in our example in Numbers was Eleazar, the son of Aaron, but this high priest, not this high priest, but a high priestly position, accompanied the red cow to the woodpile and officiated the ceremony. Now, this priest would cut the throat of the cow and then gather some of its blood in a ceremonial vessel. And he would then turn and face, from where he stood, the door into the sanctuary and sprinkle some blood towards it with his finger 7 times, all in the direction of the sanctuary. Now, of course, he was quite some distance away, so a line of sight had to be established so that he literally could see the door into the holy place. That is that first chamber you walk into, right, inside the sanctuary. And after this, the entire cow, every part of it, was burned up whole atop this huge bonfire. And while the cow was being burned up, the priest would throw cedar wood, hyssop, often called oregano, and red-colored thread on top of it to be consumed as well. In essence, the wood, hyssop, and thread were being added to this mix, purification mix. Now, upon completing his task, the priest had to remove his priestly garment and bathe in water. And after putting on fresh garments, he could then re-enter the camp. But he personally remained in a ritually unclean state until the sun set, indicating the end of the current day and the beginning of the next. Whoever assisted him in this operation also had to remove and wash their garments, take a bath, and they too then remained in a state of impurity until the sun went down. Next, a man who had not participated in any of this ritual up to this point, and therefore was still ritually clean, was to gather up those ashes, put them in a designated place where they would be used to combine with water, and thereby make this special purification liquid for use as it was needed. This man, in gathering those ashes, became defiled. So as with all the others involved, he had to wash his clothes, take a bath, and remain in an unclean state until the sunset. Now, because the level of impurity of contact with human death was so great, it could not only defile whomever or whatever touched it, it could even defile whomever or whatever came in close proximity to it. However, that which actually came into contact with the dead body was contaminated with a greater degree of impurity than whatever was merely nearby. Now, the remedy for this impurity caused by a dead body was this mixture of ashes of the red heifer and water. Now, the mixture was sprinkled on the home or the building where this person died. It was also sprinkled upon whomever came into contact with that person. And the sprinkling procedure occurred twice. The first time was on the third day after the defilement. The second time was on the seventh day after the defilement. The defiled persons who had been properly sprinkled were then returned to a ritually pure status at the end of that seventh day, at which time they washed their clothes and they bathed. Now, this was no light matter. Anyone who became defiled from a corpse and did not go through this ritual procedure was to be cut off. Now, we talked about this term cut off, karet, in Hebrew, and you can go review previous lessons for more information. In a nutshell, generally a person who was cut off lost his relationship with the people of Israel and, more importantly, with the God of Israel. And a critical question arises: why such a severe penalty? The answer for this drastic consequence is near the end of verse 20. The person who has been defiled by a dead body and refuses God's provision to be made clean has what? Defiled the Lord's sanctuary. God's holiness has been endangered. And there is nothing more high-handed than to bring defilement into the dwelling place of Jehovah. Keep that at the front of your mind as we continue, because we're going to revisit that. So to end the chapter, we are next told that the clean person who did this sprinkling of the ash and the water mixture onto the defiled person now himself becomes into an unclean state. And then must, of course, wash his clothes, take a bath, wait until the sun goes down. Even more, anyone who is currently ritually clean and touches even a drop of this special purification water, they become unclean. And whomever or whatever touches that unclean person now becomes unclean, and that's the completion of the red heifer story. So, the first principle of uncleanness is that impurity, unclean and impure synonyms, can be transmitted by touch from one thing to another, whether it concerns objects or people. I remind you what I said at the outset today. You can be uncomfortable with this. You can even not like it very much. But here it is, in black and white. This is not taken from Hebrew tradition. This is not human commentary. We are reading this directly from God's Word, the Bible. Therefore, we are obligated to deal with it as it is, and not just simply try to wish it away or declare it null and void. See, the stunning paradox of the red heifer sacrifice is this. Everybody that has anything to do with the preparation, death, burning up, and gathering of its ashes becomes unclean. On the surface, this makes no sense at all. Can it be that we have Jehovah ordering some holy and or clean people to intentionally become ritually defiled? But the paradox only deepens. The person made unclean from touching a corpse is made clean from these ashes of the red heifer. But the clean person who performs the ritual and applies the ashes becomes themselves unclean. As the rabbis say about this procedure, the same ashes that purify the defiled also defiled the pure. I mean, this is completely opposite from all of the other sacrifices and their effects. Typically, handling a sacrifice properly automatically brings a measure of holiness with it. Now, one of the difficulties in grasping the red heifer sacrifice, the regular temple sacrifices, and all the accompanying temple rituals is defining the term holy. In Hebrew, this term is kodesh or kadosh, and it means to be set apart for a purpose. And when, for instance, my wife is getting ready to do laundry, she carefully separates types of materials as well as light versus dark colored loads. It is perfectly, that exact procedure is perfectly within the meaning of kadosh or kadesh to apply that Hebrew term to her separating one kind of color or cloth from another. Just separating, setting apart. It's only when something is kadosh for God, separated away specifically for the service to the Lord, that it carries with it a sense of holy, as we think of holy in the religious sphere. Thus, the red heifer is not so much holy as it is simply kadosh. It's just set apart in a very generic sense. But it is set apart not for service to God, like in a standard temple ritual, standard temple sacrifice, but rather it's set apart for what? Destruction. This destruction then will be used by God to make his people clean again. Whoa. Now, if this isn't strange to you, you are sound asleep. Another key to understanding the red heifer ritual is to notice that the Torah calls the sacrifice in Hebrew a tought. Tought is one of 5 different categories of sacrifice that the Torah calls for. Most Bible translations will render the Hebrew term tought, as a sin offering. But that is rather ambiguous and it somewhat misses the purpose of it. Tought is better interpreted as a purification offering. In other words, while it may well be that a sin eventually leads to the need for this tought sacrifice, the effect of the tought is not to atone for the sinner, but rather to decontaminate him. You get that? That is, it's part of what's necessary to return people to purity. The tought, this is a regular, everyday Levitical purification offering, is a most unique sacrifice. Because one of its effects is to make the handlers and the ritual implementers impure. How strange. So naturally, we find this exact thing also applies to the red heifer ritual in Numbers 19. Here is the reason for this. The sacrificial animal, in our case the red heifer, purifies by means of effectively absorbing the defiled person or object's impurities as though it was a spiritual sponge. Because the tought sacrifice, the animal, serves its purpose by soaking up the certain types of contamination it was meant to absorb, then it becomes contaminated with impurity. And the only remedy for that is its destruction by fire away from anything holy. It must even be destroyed away from anything clean. And what's clean? The camp, inside the camp of Israel. Okay. Let me put a couple of pieces together for you as we bring this Shabbat lesson to a close. Recall what it says in verse 20. That if anyone does not purify themselves with the red heifer ashes mixed with water from the uncleanness of death, in other words, due to touching a dead body, then they'll be cut off. They will have their relationship with the congregation of Israel ended. They will have their relationship with God terminated. Why this severe penalty? Because the consequence of a person contracting uncleanness from a corpse is, we are told, it defiles what? God's sanctuary. It is a defilement of God's sanctuary that is the largest issue. And therefore, it is the defilement of God's sanctuary that must be remedied. Bottom line to all this, the ashes of the red heifer were, when mixed with living water, ultimately designed to purify the sanctuary of God. And it has long been understood within Judaism that the people of God are in some mysterious way also sanctuaries of God. Did you know that? No wonder the good rabbi in our story had such a hard time explaining just why ashes that were obviously meant to purify the temple of God were for some elusive reason also used in a ritual to purify a human being from the worst kind of contamination there was, contact with death. The rabbi did not understand what we all now know in hindsight. That eventually, once the Messiah had finished giving up his life to atone for ours, our uncleanness would also be removed. And it also explains why it was necessary that our Messiah was crucified where? Outside the camp of Israel, just as was the red heifer. He took on not only our sin, but also our worst uncleanness from death.
For more teaching and information, visit us online today. Come and be a part of our fellowship. Here at The Seed, enjoy worshiping and learning God's Word with us.